MapFab is a new level editor for making new NES games. Right now I have an example project loaded, which you can get this example project on the GitHub. But just kind of show you what it looks like. We got, here's a level I'm working on. We have some other levels. It's decently flexible, but the thing to remember is MapFab always uses 16 by 16 meta tiles, which I'll get into more of what that means, but the basic idea is you're building these levels out of 16 by 16 pixel tiles, which you define in these earlier steps. At the top of the window you have these 5 tabs, and when you're building your project you're going to do this more or less in order from left to right. So you're going to start with CHR, then you're going to do palettes, meta tiles, levels, and then object classes. So let's start with CHR. Now CHR is like the raw graphics data the NES uses to display. So here's an example of CHR. This is one I'm just editing in GIMP. If you go to the properties, it's a 128 by 128 pixel image comprised out of 8 by 8 pixel tiles, and those tiles use 4 colors. I recommend using a grayscale palette, white to black, but there's also like CHR editors you can use. So for example, here is NES Assets Workshop. There's also YYCHR, and this one only does CHR, so if you want like the simplest thing possible, you can use this one. Anyway, once you've saved your CHR file, you can load it in MapFab. So I'm just going to start with a new MapFab project. I'm going to go to the CHR tab. I'm going to click Set Path for this CHR line. I'm going to select my CHR, and in this case it's a PNG, but it could be a .chr file. And that's it. You can also give it a name if you want. So I'm going to call it like my tile set. And yeah, you can, in MapFab you can have as many CHR files as you want, but for this example I'm just going to use one. You'll also notice on this tab there's this thing called Collision Tileset Path. For now, just ignore that. I'll talk about it more later. Moving on, we'll go to the Palettes tab, where we'll define the colors the levels use. So on the left side of the screen here, we have a list of all the colors the NES can display. On the right side of the screen, we'll be defining like the actual palettes we're going to use. So by default we get just a single palette, but we can increase the number with the slider, so we'll do 2. Now the way to understand this is a palette is one of these horizontal rows, and these palettes are further broken down into 8 different subpalettes. So the first 4 subpalettes are for the background, and then the last 4 subpalettes are for the sprites. This column on the far right, it says UBC. That's a color kind of shared amongst all subpalettes. You'll see in a bit. Anyway, to set the data here, we're just going to use the stamp tool, top left. We're going to select some colors, and we're just going to stamp them onto these, this grid. Now you can do it one by one. If you want to do it a little faster, you can select multiple tiles, and you can paste multiple tiles using the stamp tool. There's also copy paste. You can select stuff, copy it, Control C, Control V, whatever you want to do. And yeah, so we'll just very quickly edit this. And I'm going to leave the sprite data out for this example. On your own project you can set the sprite data. With our colors set up, we're then going to go to the Meta Tiles tab. And the first thing you want to do when you get here is go down to this Display CHR field, and you're going to select the CHR you loaded earlier. When you do that, you should immediately see it here. You're going to see it with the palette you defined applied to it. So this is displaying the first palette's first subpalette, and we can change the subpalette using these buttons, the attribute buttons, just to see how that looks. And we can change the palette using this display palette button. So here's the second row palette. Now this green color, like that's all over the CHR, that's what that UBC is. We change it to the other palette, now it's the purple that's in this far right. So yeah, that's what that UBC is doing. So what is a meta tile? Well, it's a 16 by 16 tile, which we're going to be building our levels out of. And it's called meta because it's comprised of 4 8 by 8 CHR tiles. So again, it's like you combine these smaller CHR tiles to create a bigger meta tile. By default, we start with just a single meta tile, but we can increase the amount using this slider on the lower left. So we can do we'll do 8 tiles for this example. And just like with palettes, the way to do this is you select some tiles on the left, and then you just use the stamp tool to draw them over here. So the one different thing is that with meta tiles we can change the attribute to get some different colors. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to very quickly draw some tiles. Yeah, so let's get our meta tiles all defined. There we go. Moving on, let's talk about collisions. So far we've defined the appearance of our meta tiles, but in the game you want more than that. You probably want to know, what does this tile do? For example, this first tile, it looks like empty space, but then these next ones look like walls. Then we have some staircases, and we have this bear, and all these might do a little bit different things, and we want to track that. Collisions is MapFab's way of doing this. It associates a 6-bit value with each meta tile. So 6-bit means we can have 64 possible collision values, which are all user defined. The way you define these collision values is using a collision tile set, which is just an image. You can make it in GIMP or another image editor, and it's 128 pixels by 128 pixels wide, comprised of 64 16 by 16 tiles. Now this is all user defined, and it's only used for display purposes in MapFab. You won't ever see this in your actual game. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be drawing these 16 by 16 tile images just to represent the collision values you want to use. So the collision value of 0 is this upper left tile. Following that is the value 1, the value 2, so on, until you reach the value 63 in the lower right corner. Again, this is all user defined, so you can basically just do whatever you want to do. So just draw another one real quick. It's just a thing for you to visualize what these values mean. Anyway, once that's done, you can go ahead and save it. You can go back to MapFab, go to the CHR tab, and you can load that collision tile set you just made. When you go back to the Meta Tiles tab and you select the Collisions option, you should then see those tiles you just drew up. Using the Stamp tool, you can stamp these over your meta tiles, just like this. And now, these meta tiles have a collision value associated with them. We're now ready to move on to the Levels tab. When you get here, first thing you want to do is set the meta tiles. So we'll set that. And when you set this, it's going to automatically copy the CHR and the palette that you are displaying in this tab. But note that you can also change this later on, you don't have to use this CHR, you don't have to use this palette. For example, we can change it, and now this level is going to use a different palette. Like with meta tiles, levels, it's just a matter of using the stamp tool, clicking on the tiles you want to stamp, and going to town. So we can do something like this. I'm actually going to change the palette back. I think this palette looks a little bit nicer. And yeah, you can just build up your level. If you want to do this a little bit quicker, one thing you can do is use the selection tool. Select the region you want to fill, go to Edit, Fill Selection, and then there you go. It's going to fill in with whatever you selected. So yeah, let's keep doing this. I'm going to just hit Control F, that's a shortcut for fill, and pretty quickly we can build up a level. So yeah, there we go. It's our very ugly looking level. You can also change the size of the level with these dimension sliders. So by default it's just a single screen. We could have, for example, a slightly wider level, or whatever you want to do. I'm going to leave it at 16 by 15 though. If you want to add a new level, the way to do that is to go up to View and click Manage Tabs, or Control T. This is a tab managing window. The way this works is if you right click in the middle, you can hit New Level, and you can just give it a name for your new level. So I'm going to call it Bobby. Okay. These check marks on this window, they're determining what tabs you're going to be editing. So if we select none, for example, we won't see anything, it's just a white screen. If we select both of them, we'll see two tabs down here in the lower left corner. So yeah, we'll go ahead and edit Bobby, the level. And I'm just going to do very quickly some weird looking shapes. So yeah, I don't know what this level is, but there you go. Okay, here's Bobby. And yeah, we could keep adding levels, you know, if you want. You can also clone levels, rename levels, and you can use these up-down buttons to reorder them if you so want. I should mention that this tab manager window, you can also use it on the meta tiles window. If we wanted to have more than one meta tile set, this is how you do it. Just, you know, click new meta tiles here. When we get to object classes in a bit, same thing. If you want more object classes, we can just do it using the tab manager. Now let's talk about objects, which can be like the enemies or the power-ups or whatever you're going to put in your levels. So to get into that, we're going to go to the Object Classes tab. Well, what is an object class? Like I said, an object is like an enemy or a power-up, or something to collect, or it can just be like a spawn point. And an object class are those like groups. So for example, enemies might be an object class, or power-ups might be an object class. And this tab lets you define the properties of what those classes have. So what we're going to do here is we're going to first go to the tab manager. We're going to rename the object class we have. So I'm going to call this enemies, because this is going to be an object class for our enemies. First thing you do with a new object class is you can give it a color. This is going to visually represent the objects of this class. You'll see what all this means in a bit. So let's choose, I don't know, how about yellow? Okay. Now, below that we have this new field button. This is how we can add properties to our object class. So I'm going to make one, I'm going to call it hit points. This is going to be the amount of hit points each object has. On this field, so here's the name, we also have this thing called the type. The type refers to the type in the MapFab programming language. If you're not using the MapFab programming language, you can ignore this. It's just a little helper for that. So yeah, we have a field. We could keep adding them, but for now, let's just use this. Going back to the Levels tab, let's place some objects down. So there's two layers in the Levels tab. There's a tile layer, and then there's an object layer. We want the object layer, of course. We have the object layer. We're going to go up to this object picker. We're going to click Edit. And the only thing we're going to do here is change the class. So we're going to change the class to enemies. When you do that, you now can edit the properties you have for the class. So here's an option for hit points. We can just give it a value. We can say like 100 hit points. And now we can use the stamp tool and we can just stamp some objects down. Like that. If you want to edit the objects, you can select them or just click on them. And you can change the properties of the object. So we'll say this object, for example, only has 50 hit points. Okay, we can place another one. This new one, we'll say it has 200 hit points. So yeah, that's how you can place some objects. We could, of course, add some more object classes. So we go to the Object Classes tab, View, Manage Tabs. We're going to do New Object Class. We'll call this Spawn Points. And for this one, I'm going to make it, let's say, red. And I'm not going to add a field. So going back to the level, I'm going to go to the object picker, change it to spawn points. I'm just going to place a single one. I'm going to say this is the spawn point for this level. So that's where the player will start. Okay, we can do the same thing for the Bobby level. So we'll go to the object layer here, make sure we're placing a spawn point, place it, go back to the enemies, 100 hit points, looks good to me. Okay, we'll just place a few enemies, and yeah, that's how we can add some objects. So that more or less wraps things up. We have our levels, our objects, and all the data we need to define those. If you want to know how to import this into an NES game, well, the documentation describes the file format, and you can write a converter script to take the MapFab file and turn it into whatever game data your game uses. If you're using the MapFab programming language, there's a built-in MapFab keyword, which automates most of that conversion, and it uses a slightly different like macro-based system. There's an example in the MapFab GitHub, so just look that up and that's how you can do it. Anyway, I hope this was insightful to you. And yeah, check out MapFab, it's on GitHub.